Imagine the world in early 1944. The war has raged on for years, and the Allies are preparing for the most ambitious military operation in history, the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe. But winning this battle would take more than brute force. It would require the greatest act of deception ever attempted. The Germans, led by Adolf Hitler, were obsessed with defending the coastline of Western Europe. They fortified every inch, especially focusing on the Pas-de-Calais region, the narrowest crossing point between Britain and France. From their perspective, it was the obvious choice for an Allied invasion. Why would the Allies risk landing at the less obvious, more heavily defended Normandy beaches when Calais was so much closer? The Allies knew Hitler's beliefs would be their greatest weapon. If they could convince the Germans that Calais was the target, they could mask the real attack, save thousands of lives, and change the course of the war. That's where Operation Fortitude came in. This wasn't just a plan. It was an elaborate, carefully choreographed performance designed to fool the entire German high command. The goal was simple: create a massive, convincing fake army poised to invade Pas-de-Calais, so real that the Germans would pour their forces there and leave Normandy vulnerable. But how do you build an army out of thin air? The answer was brilliant. The Allies combined cutting-edge technology, expert craftsmanship, and psychological warfare. They turned the English countryside into a giant stage filled with inflatable tanks, wooden planes, and fake landing crafts. From the air, these props looked indistinguishable from the real thing. But appearances weren't enough. The Allies fed false intelligence through double agents and flooded German radio networks with fake messages. Every detail was scripted: troop movements, supply requests, weather reports, all to convince German spies that an enormous force was preparing to strike at Calais. German reconnaissance planes flew regularly over southern England, snapping photos and monitoring activity every time they saw signs of a massive build-up. The beaches near Dover looked alive with military life, or so it seemed. The deception was so convincing that even after the real invasion began, on June 6, 1944, Hitler hesitated. He believed the Normandy landings were a diversion, the real attack still to come at Calais. This delay in German response gave the Allies precious time to establish a foothold and ultimately win the war. Operation Fortitude was more than just a military ruse. It was a masterpiece of intelligence, acting, and strategy, proving that sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet, but a lie your enemy chooses to believe. When it came to convincing the Germans that the main invasion force was gathering in southeast England, the Allies knew they needed a name, a leader so respected, and feared that his very presence would make the deception believable. That man was General George S. Patton. Patton was no ordinary commander. He was a larger-than-life figure, known for his boldness, aggressive tactics, and fiery personality. The Germans respected and feared him in equal measure. To them, Patton was the face of America's military power, a man capable of leading a decisive strike that could break the back of the Nazi war machine. So when the Allies created their fake army, officially called the First United States Army Group, or FUSAG, they made sure Patton was its commander. This phantom army didn't exist in reality, but attaching Patton's name to it made it terrifyingly real in the eyes of German intelligence. The goal was clear. If the Germans believed Patton was massing troops near Dover, preparing to cross the English Channel, they would focus their defences there, away from Normandy, where the real invasion was being planned. To sell this illusion, the Allies went all out. Inflatable tanks, wooden planes, and fake landing crafts were placed across the English countryside, mimicking the build-up of a powerful invasion force. Campfires burned to produce smoke. Fake troop movements were staged. Even the sounds of an army were simulated. Through cleverly crafted radio transmissions, German spies and reconnaissance planes were none the wiser. They reported seeing a massive force preparing to strike at Pas-de-Calais, led by the unstoppable General Patton. This wasn't just a name drop. It was psychological warfare at its finest. Patton's reputation lent credibility to the entire operation, making it one of the most effective military deceptions in history. The Germans fell for it completely. Even after the Normandy landings began, they believed Patton's army was still waiting to launch the main attack. This belief kept their best units tied down, allowing the Allies to secure their foothold and push forward. Patton's phantom army was a ghost, force that never fired a shot, but played a critical role in saving thousands of lives and turning the tide of World War II. The Allies understood that to fool the enemy, it wasn't enough to just talk about a massive army gathering. It had to look real, and so the English countryside became a massive stage for one of the most daring illusions in military history. At first glance, the scene was impressive. From the sky, German reconnaissance planes saw rows upon rows of tanks lined up near the coast. But these weren't real tanks. They were inflatable decoys, rubber replicas crafted to look authentic from the air. These giant balloons mimicked the shape and size of Sherman tanks, casting convincing shadows and fooling enemy pilots flying hundreds of feet above. But it wasn't just tanks. Wooden planes, carefully painted and positioned on makeshift airfields, created the illusion of air power. Dummy landing crafts sat poised along the beaches, ready to carry the phantom soldiers to the shores of Pas-de-Calais. Campgrounds were set up with fake tents, surrounded by piles of discarded gear, campfires with real smoke, and even mannequins dressed as soldiers milling about. Every detail was meticulously planned to convince German spies that this was a living, breathing army preparing for invasion. Fake vehicle tracks were carved into the mud. Footprints marked the ground, and even small fires were lit to mimic cooking and heating. The effect was so convincing that German aerial reconnaissance photographs captured these scenes as genuine. Military build-up? Intelligence officers pored over these images, reinforcing the belief that a massive force was assembling right where the Allies wanted them to think. But the deception didn't end there. To complement these visuals, the Allies used sound carefully. Orchestrated radio traffic mimicked the chatter of real troops, with fake commands, supply requests, and even complaints. This multi-sensory illusion created a perfect storm of false information. The power of this smoke and mirrors approach cannot be overstated. It wasn't just about fooling the enemy. It was about shaping their decisions, forcing them to deploy their forces where they were least effective. In the end, these inflatable tanks and fake camps played a silent yet pivotal role in the success of D-Day, helping to divert German attention and resources away from the real battlefield. A reminder that in war, sometimes what you see and what you don't see can make all end difference. In warfare, information is power. The Allies knew that simply building fake tanks and camps wouldn't be enough to convince the Germans. Enemy intelligence didn't just rely on aerial photos. They were constantly listening, monitoring radio traffic to track troop movements and gather clues about invasion plans. So the Allies crafted an invisible weapon, a massive, fake radio network designed to mimic the chatter of a real army. This wasn't random noise, it was carefully scripted and timed to mirror exactly what German signal analysts expected to hear. For weeks leading up to D-Day, specially trained operators sent out thousands of fake radio messages. These messages included everything from supply, requests and equipment, orders to weather updates and routine reports. Even minor details like soldiers complaining about food or equipment issues were simulated to add authenticity. Each radio transmission was crafted to sound genuine. The operators studied real military communication, patterns, how different units spoke, how often they transmitted, and even the subtle rhythms and pauses unique to each operator. This attention to detail was critical because German analysts could identify units and locations based on radio, traffic patterns, and operator fingerprints. To further the illusion, radio stations were moved regularly. By changing the physical location of transmitters, the Allies made it seem like units were constantly relocating, exactly as a real army would do during preparations for an invasion. German intelligence intercepted these transmissions and was completely fooled. The volume and complexity of the radio traffic convinced them that a massive force was mobilizing just across the channel, reinforcing their belief that Pas-de-Calais was the target. The Allies even went as far as sending fake encrypted messages, meaningless code that sounded like high-level military communications. This gave German analysts the impression that critical orders were being passed among real commanders. This invisible network of voices, static, and signals was a triumph of psychological warfare. It painted a convincing picture of an army bustling with activity, right where the Germans least wanted it. When the real invasion began in Normandy, German commanders were still focused on the fake radio traffic from Pas-de-Calais. This delay in response was crucial. It gave the Allies the precious time needed to secure the beaches and push inland. Operation Fortitude's radio deception proved that sometimes the most effective weapons aren't made of steel. They are signals sent over the airwaves, illusions crafted in sound that can change the course of history. The moment the Allies landed on the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, a carefully crafted web of deception was already in place. A web that had spun an elaborate lie so convincing, it shaped the decisions of Hitler and his generals. Even as the Allied forces fought fiercely to secure a foothold on those treacherous shores. The German High Command remained convinced that the main invasion was still coming at Pas-de-Calais. For weeks after D-Day, Hitler believed the Normandy landings were merely a feint, a diversion to draw German forces away from the real attack. This belief was no accident. It was the direct result of Operation Fortitude, the masterful deception that made an entire phantom army appear poised to strike at Calais, thanks to inflatable tanks, fake camps, constant radio chatter, and the legendary name of General Patton. The Germans' attention was locked on the wrong place. Because of this, some of Germany's best panzer divisions, the armoured units that could have crushed the Allies, were held back near Pas-de-Calais for nearly 7 critical weeks. This hesitation allowed the Allies to build their strength, bring in reinforcements, and expand their beachhead. Operation Fortitude didn't just save lives, it saved the entire invasion. Without it, the outcome of D-Day could have been dramatically different. The success of the deception gave the Allies a vital edge in one of history's most decisive battles. But beyond military strategy, this operation was a testament to human ingenuity and creativity. It showed that war isn't fought by guns alone. It's won through cunning, misdirection, and the ability to make your enemy believe what you want them to believe. Operation Fortitude stands as one of the greatest intelligence feats of all time, a perfect blend of technology, psychology, and theatre. It reshaped the course of World War II and changed the world forever. When history remembers D-Day, it honours the bravery of soldiers storming the beaches, but it should also honour the unseen architects of deception, the men and women who built illusions that turned the tide of war. Because sometimes, the deadliest weapon is not the sharpest sword or the loudest gun, but a story so believable that your enemy can't see the truth, and that story was Operation Fortitude.